Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the human flagship Defiance, watching the stars through the massive viewing window. His hands were clasped behind his back and his face showed no emotion. But inside, his heart was racing. Today would change everything. "Sir, we're receiving the Zephyrian response," said Captain Lisa Hart, his second-in-command. She walked over with a data pad in her hands. Her voice was steady, but Morrison could see the worry in her eyes. Morrison took the pad and read the message. The alien words had been translated into English, but their meaning was crystal clear. The Zephyrian Empire rejected humanity's peace offer. They wanted humans to surrender completely and work as slaves in their mining colonies. "They think we're weak," Morrison said quietly. He handed the pad back to Lisa. "They think we're just another species they can crush under their boots." Dr. Kevin Barnes, the fleet's chief strategist, approached them. He was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent months studying the enemy, and what he learned kept him awake at night. "Admiral, our spy networks have sent new intelligence," Barnes said. "The Zephyrians are moving their fleets to the edge of our space. They're planning to attack our outer colonies first." Morrison nodded slowly. The Zephyrians had done this before. They would attack the weakest targets first, then move inward until they reached Earth itself. It was their standard method of conquest. "How many ships?" Morrison asked. 3,000 vessels in the first wave," Barnes replied. "They're bringing everything they have." Lisa whistled softly. "That's 10 times bigger than our visible fleet." "Our visible fleet," Morrison repeated, emphasizing the word visible. He looked at both of them. "But they don't know about our hidden assets, do they?" Barnes shook his head. "No, sir. Our intelligence operations have been perfect. They think our total fleet is only 300 ships." Morrison walked to the communications station. The young officer there looked up at him with respect and fear. Everyone knew that whatever happened today would decide the fate of humanity. "Open a channel to all Zephyrian command frequencies," Morrison ordered. "Sir?" the communications officer asked, surprised. "You heard me. I want every Zephyrian commander to hear this message." The officer's fingers flew over his controls. "Channel open, sir. Broadcasting on all enemy frequencies." Morrison took a deep breath. Behind him, the entire bridge crew stopped what they were doing to listen. "This was history in the making. This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Human Space Defense Force," he began. His voice was calm but carried a weight that made everyone listening feel the importance of his words. "For the past 6 months, we have tried to find a peaceful solution to our differences. We offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense pacts." He paused, letting his words sink in across the galaxy. "Your response has been to demand our surrender and enslavement. You believe we are weak because we chose diplomacy first. You believe we are easy prey because we value peace." Lisa watched Morrison's face. She had served with him for 10 years and she had never seen him like this. There was something dangerous in his eyes now, something that had been sleeping but was now fully awake. "You have made a grave mistake," Morrison continued. "You see, we humans have a saying, 'Speak softly and carry a big stick.' We have spoken softly for months. But you have chosen to ignore our words." The bridge was completely silent now. Even the ship's engine seemed quieter, as if the entire vessel was holding its breath. "You have chosen to threaten our children. You have chosen to threaten our homes. You have chosen to threaten our very existence as a free people." Morrison's voice grew harder with each word. "So be it. You have made your choice and now you will live with the consequences. This is humanity's final warning to the Zephyrian Empire and all its allies. You chose this war. What happens next is on your heads, not ours." He gestured to the communications officer who cut the transmission. The bridge remained silent for several seconds. Then Dr. Barnes spoke up. "Sir, do you think they'll reconsider?" Morrison turned around and everyone could see that the peaceful diplomat was gone. In his place stood a warrior who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. "No," Morrison said simply. "They won't. They're too proud, too sure of their own power. They think we're bluffing." "Are we bluffing, sir?" asked a young lieutenant. Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had been pretending to be prey for far too long. "Lieutenant, for the past 50 years, humanity has been preparing for this day. While the Zephyrians were conquering weak civilizations and growing soft, we were planning, building, and training. They think they know what we're capable of." He walked back to the viewing window and looked out at the stars. "They have no idea what's coming. Lisa joined him at the window. "Admiral, are you sure about this?" "Once we start this fight, there's no going back." Morrison nodded slowly. "Lisa, they've already started the fight. They started it the moment they decided that freedom-loving people should be slaves. They started it when they chose conquest over cooperation." He turned to face his crew. "Send the activation signal to all defense fleets. Tell them Operation Thunder is now active. Tell them the Zephyrians have made their choice." "Yes, sir," came the response from multiple stations. Morrison looked out at the stars one more time. Somewhere out there in the darkness of space, the largest alien fleet in galactic history was moving toward human space. They were confident, proud, and completely unprepared for what they were about to face. "You chose this war," Morrison whispered to the stars. "And now you're going to learn what happens when you threaten humanity's children." The Defiance began to move, and across human space, thousands of hidden ships began powering up their engines. The war was about to begin, but it wouldn't be the quick conquest the Zephyrians expected. It would be something entirely different, something they would regret for the rest of their very short lives. High Admiral Vexthar of the Zephyrian Empire laughed as he read the human message. His forearms gestured dismissively while his purple skin changed color with amusement. Around him, his command staff joined in the laughter. "Did you hear that?" Vexthar said to his officers. "The humans think they can threaten us. These primitive creatures actually believe they can fight the mighty Zephyrian Empire." His second-in-command, General Krixtal, nodded enthusiastically. "My lord, our scouts report their entire fleet is only 300 ships. We have 10 times that number in our first attack wave alone." "Exactly," Vexthar said, settling into his command throne. "This will be the easiest conquest in our empire's history. Begin the attack on their outer colonies. Show these humans what happens when insects try to sting gods." The Zephyrian fleet moved forward like a metal storm, their ships gleaming in the starlight. They had conquered 47 different species over the past 1,000 years. Each time it had been the same story. Initial resistance, followed by quick surrender once the aliens realized how outmatched they were. But while the Zephyrians celebrated their coming victory, something else was happening in the depths of human space. General Amy Collins stood in a command center buried deep inside an asteroid. Around her, hundreds of technicians worked at control panels, their faces lit by the glow of their screens. This place didn't exist on any official map. As far as the galaxy knew, this asteroid was just another piece of space rock. "General, all Cerberus stations are reporting ready," said her aide, Colonel Beth Rodriguez. Amy nodded. Project Cerberus had been humanity's greatest secret for 30 years. While diplomats talked peace and traders built relationships, engineers and soldiers had been preparing for war. "Activate all hidden shipyards," Amy ordered. "It's time to show the galaxy what humans have really been building." Across the solar system, asteroids that had looked empty and lifeless suddenly came alive. Hidden doors opened in their surfaces, revealing massive construction facilities. Ships began emerging from these secret bases, not the small, simple vessels the aliens expected, but sleek warships armed with weapons the galaxy had never seen. Chief Engineer Ryan Tucker watched from the bridge of his ship as the first wave of hidden vessels powered up their engines. He had spent 15 years designing these ships, and he was proud of what humanity had achieved. "Sir, all stealth systems are active," reported his navigation officer. "The enemy won't see us coming until we're right on top of them." Ryan smiled. The Zephyrians had superior numbers, but they had grown lazy from centuries of easy victories. They expected their enemies to fight like honor-bound warriors, standing in neat formations and following the old rules of space combat. Humans didn't follow those rules. Commander Paul Stewart crouched in the pilot seat of his fighter, one of 50 small ships hidden inside a fake cargo vessel. His heart was beating fast, but his hands were steady on the controls. Around him, his squadron waited for the signal. "Remember, people," Paul said into his radio, "we don't fight fair. We fight smart, hit hard, hit fast, and get out before they know what happened." The fake cargo ship was approaching the first Zephyrian fleet. To the aliens, it looked like a helpless human transport trying to escape. They had no idea it was actually a Trojan horse filled with humanity's best pilots. Captain Lisa Hart watched the tactical display from the Defiance. Admiral Morrison stood beside her, his face calm but his eyes sharp. The first test was about to begin. "Sir, the Zephyrians are taking the bait," Lisa reported. "They're moving to intercept Commander Stewart's transport." Good, Morrison said. Let them think they're about to capture some helpless refugees. The Zephyrian ships surrounded the fake transport just as planned. Their leader opened a communication channel, probably to demand surrender. Instead, Paul Stewart's voice came through, calm and deadly. Hello there, Paul said. We have a message from humanity. The cargo ship suddenly split open like a flower, releasing 50 fighters that immediately opened fire. The Zephyrian ships, caught completely off guard, tried to respond, but it was too late. Paul's squadron struck with the speed and precision of a lightning bolt, destroying 3 enemy vessels before the aliens even knew they were under attack. But that was just the beginning. All across the battle zone, space itself seemed to come alive. Ships that had been invisible suddenly appeared, opening fire from positions the Zephyrians thought were empty. Asteroids revealed themselves to be weapons platforms. Even space stations that looked abandoned suddenly bristled with guns. Ryan Tucker's engineering vessel moved through the battle like a ghost, its advanced stealth systems making it nearly impossible to detect. When Zephyrian ships tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that seemed to appear from nowhere. This is impossible, General Krixtal shouted on the Zephyrian command frequency. Where are all these ships coming from? High Admiral Vexthar stared at his tactical display in growing horror. What should have been a simple massacre was turning into a nightmare. His forces were being picked apart by an enemy that fought like no other species he had ever encountered. They're not fighting with honor, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Captain Maria Santos heard this transmission from her command ship and couldn't help but laugh. Honor? She said to her crew. We'll show them honor after they're no longer a threat to our children. Her ship, disguised as a damaged freighter, had been broadcasting fake distress calls. When Zephyrian vessels came to investigate, expecting to find easy prisoners, they instead found themselves facing a fully armed warship with shields raised and weapons hot. The battle continued for 6 hours. When it was over, the mighty Zephyrian first wave had been reduced to scattered survivors running for their lives. They had expected to crush 300 human ships. Instead, they had faced over 2,000 vessels that fought with tactics and technology the aliens couldn't understand. Dr. Alex Morgan monitored the enemy communications from his intelligence ship. He could hear the fear in the Zephyrian voices as they tried to report what had happened to their high command. My lord, one survivor was saying, the humans, they're not what we thought. They don't fight like the other species. They fight like demons. High Admiral Vexthar received these reports with growing dread. In one day, humanity had destroyed his most powerful fleet. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were now floating debris. But the worst part wasn't the military defeat. It was the realization that everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about humans was wrong. This wasn't a primitive species lucky enough to develop space travel. This was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The news of the first battle spread across human space like wildfire. On every human world and every space station, people gathered around screens to watch the reports. The impossible had happened. Humanity had won. But Admiral Morrison knew this was just the beginning. The Zephyrians would be angry now, and angry enemies were dangerous enemies. Colonel Beth Rodriguez stood on the walls of New Geneva, watching the sky. The colony world was beautiful, with green fields and blue rivers that reminded people of Earth. But today, beauty didn't matter. Today, only survival counted. Ma'am, civilian evacuation is complete, reported her aide. All non-combatants are in the underground shelters. Beth nodded, but she didn't take her eyes off the sky. The Zephyrians would come here next. New Geneva was humanity's largest farming world, and losing it would mean food shortages across human space. What the aliens didn't know was that New Geneva was also a trap. Activate the civilian defense protocols, Beth ordered. Across the colony, something remarkable happened. Farmers put down their tools and picked up weapons. Teachers left their classrooms and took positions in hidden bunkers. Shop owners closed their stores and opened secret armories. Every human settlement had been preparing for this day. Every civilian had been trained. Every building had been designed with defense in mind. The Zephyrians thought they would find helpless farmers. Instead, they would face an entire world that had turned into a fortress. In space above New Geneva, Lieutenant Commander Nick Peterson waited with his small fleet. His ships were hidden in the shadow of the planet's moon, their engines cold and their weapons powered down. To any scanner, they looked like dead metal. Nick had spent 5 years pretending to be a peaceful explorer, visiting Zephyrian worlds and learning their secrets. He knew their navigation routes, their supply lines, and their military codes. Now it was time to use that knowledge. "Sir, enemy fleet detected," his sensor officer reported. 200 ships approaching from the galactic north. "Perfect," Nick said quietly. Just like our intelligence predicted. The Zephyrian fleet approached New Geneva expecting easy prey. Their plan was simple: destroy the orbital defenses, land troops, and take control of the food production facilities. They had done it dozens of times before on other worlds. But as they entered the planet's gravity well, everything went wrong. The first surprise came from the planet itself. What looked like farming equipment suddenly revealed itself to be camouflaged missile launchers. The peaceful grain silos opened up to show anti-ship batteries. Even the fake barn buildings were actually concealed weapon platforms. "Impossible," muttered the Zephyrian fleet commander as his ships came under fire from the planet's surface. "These are farmers, not soldiers." But Colonel Beth Rodriguez and her people weren't just farmers anymore. They were humanity's children, and they were fighting for their home. The second surprise came from Lieutenant Commander Nick Peterson's hidden fleet. Using stolen Zephyrian military codes, his ships had been able to position themselves perfectly. When the enemy vessels were focused on the ground fire, Nick's fleet struck from behind. "All ships weapons free," Nick ordered. "Hit them hard and hit them fast." The battle for New Geneva lasted 8 hours. When it was over, the Zephyrian fleet was gone and the human colony still stood. But Nick knew this victory came with a price. The aliens now knew that humans didn't fight like other species. They would adapt. They would change their tactics. But so would humanity. Captain Maria Santos received new orders while her ship was being repaired. She was to take her vessel deep into Zephyrian space and gather intelligence on their home systems. It was a dangerous mission, but Maria had volunteered for it. "Why are we doing this, Captain?" asked her navigation officer as they prepared to leave. Maria looked at the young man and saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. "Because we need to know what we're really fighting." The journey took 2 weeks. Maria's ship used advanced stealth technology to slip past Zephyrian patrols and surveillance stations. What she found when she reached the inner systems shocked her to the core. The Zephyrians weren't just conquerors. They were exterminators. Planet after planet showed the same pattern. First, the aliens would defeat the local military. Then they would enslave the population for a few years, using them to strip mine all valuable resources. Finally, when the worlds were empty of anything useful, they would eliminate the entire species and move on. "Captain," her intelligence officer said quietly, "we've identified 47 different species that the Zephyrians have completely wiped out. Billions of people gone forever." Maria felt a cold anger growing in her chest. This wasn't war. This was genocide on a galactic scale. "Send everything back to Admiral Morrison," she ordered. "He needs to see this." Dr. Alex Morgan received Maria's intelligence reports and immediately understood their importance. He called an emergency meeting with Admiral Morrison and the other senior commanders. "Sir, we're not just fighting for our own survival," Alex said as he displayed the horrific evidence. "We're fighting to prevent the extinction of every free species in the galaxy." Admiral Morrison studied the images of dead worlds and extinct civilizations. His face remained calm, but inside he felt a rage unlike anything he had ever experienced. "How many species are still alive under Zephyrian rule?" Morrison asked. 12 that we can identify," Alex replied. "All of them enslaved, all of them scheduled for elimination once their worlds are stripped clean." Morrison nodded slowly. The situation was even worse than they had imagined. But it also meant that humanity couldn't just defend itself. They had to go on the attack. "Send a message to all human forces," Morrison ordered. "Operation Thunder is now Operation Liberation. We're not just protecting ourselves anymore. We're going to free every enslaved world and stop this genocide once and for all." Major Greg Foster, the chief of human military engineering, received the new orders with grim satisfaction. His teams had been studying captured Zephyrian technology, and they had learned something interesting. The aliens were advanced, but they weren't innovative. They conquered other species and stole their technology instead of developing their own. This made them powerful, but it also made them predictable. "Sir, we can turn their own systems against them," Greg reported to Morrison. Every Zephyrian ship uses stolen technology from the species they conquered. If we can liberate some of those enslaved worlds, we can learn how to shut down their entire fleet. Morrison smiled for the first time in days. The plan was dangerous and would require perfect timing, but it could work. High Admiral Vexthar sat in his command center, staring at reports of human attacks across the Empire. These weren't random raids. They were coordinated strikes hitting the most important Zephyrian facilities with surgical precision. "My lord," his aide said nervously, "the humans seem to know exactly where to hit us for maximum damage." Vexthar's purple skin turned a darker shade with anger. "How is this possible? How do they know our system so well?" The truth was becoming clear to the Zephyrian leadership. Humanity's peaceful diplomatic missions over the past century hadn't been about trade or cultural exchange. They had been intelligence-gathering operations. The humans had been studying their enemies for decades, learning their weaknesses and preparing for war. But the worst realization was yet to come. As reports flooded in from across the Empire, Vexithar began to understand that he wasn't fighting a primitive species that had gotten lucky. He was fighting evolution's answer to the Zephyrian Empire. And humanity was winning. Admiral Morrison stood before a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Red dots marked Zephyrian-controlled systems, while blue dots showed human territory. For the first time in months, there were more blue dots than red ones. "Operation Retribution is ready to begin, sir," reported Captain Lisa Hart. "All fleets are in position." Morrison nodded. The time for defense was over. Now humanity would take the fight to the enemy's home systems. "Begin the operation," Morrison ordered. "And may God have mercy on their souls because we won't." Across the galaxy, human fleets struck simultaneously at 50 different Zephyrian systems. But these weren't random attacks. Each target had been carefully chosen for maximum impact on the alien empire's ability to make war. Commander Tony Williams led the assault on the Krextai system, where the Zephyrians had enslaved an entire species called the Valdari. Tony's fleet arrived expecting fierce resistance, but what they found was something else entirely. "Sir, we're receiving a signal from the planet's surface," his communications officer reported. "It's not Zephyrian. It's from the slaves." Tony listened to the transmission and felt his anger grow even hotter. The Valdari were begging for rescue. They had been waiting for someone, anyone, to free them from decades of slavery and torture. "All ships prepare for planetary assault," Tony ordered. "We're getting those people out of there." The battle for Krextai was different from anything the humans had fought before. The Zephyrians had built their bases using enslaved workers, and those same workers now turned against their masters. As human forces attacked from space, the Valdari rose up from within. Tony watched from his ship as Zephyrian facilities exploded across the planet's surface. But he felt no joy in the destruction. What he saw down there was evidence of crimes that could never be forgiven. "Captain, you need to see this," said his intelligence officer, her voice shaking. Tony looked at the data she handed him and felt sick. The Zephyrians hadn't just enslaved the Valdari. They had been systematically murdering them for sport, keeping detailed records of their kills like trophies. "Send this information to Admiral Morrison immediately," Tony said. "Everyone needs to know what we're really fighting." Captain Rachel Bell received Tony's intelligence report while her ship was infiltrating the Zephyrian supply lines. She had been conducting reconnaissance missions for months, but this new information changed everything. "Sir, I'm reading similar patterns in all the enslaved systems," she reported to Morrison. "The Zephyrians aren't just conquering these species. They're committing genocide for entertainment." Morrison's face remained calm, but everyone on the bridge could feel the cold fury radiating from him. "How many species have they completely exterminated?" "At least 200 that we can confirm," Rachel replied. "And they have plans to eliminate the remaining 12 enslaved species within the next 5 years. Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something new there. Something that made even his veteran crew members step back. "Change of orders," Morrison said quietly. "We're not just stopping a war anymore. We're delivering justice for an entire galaxy." Major Greg Foster worked around the clock to convert captured Zephyrian facilities into human production centers. His engineering teams had discovered that the aliens' technology was powerful, but poorly integrated. They used stolen systems from different species without really understanding how they worked together. "Sir, we figured out how to hack their command networks," Greg reported. Every Zephyrian ship is connected to a central control system. If we can take control of that system, we can shut down their entire fleet. Morrison studied the technical reports. It was an ambitious plan, but it could end the war in a single stroke. What do you need? Morrison asked. Access to their central command station, Greg replied. It's located in their home system, heavily defended and surrounded by their most powerful fleets. Morrison smiled grimly. Leave that to me. High Admiral Vexthar stood in his personal chambers staring out at the stars. Reports of human victories came in every hour now. Entire Zephyrian fleets were being destroyed or captured. Enslaved worlds were being liberated faster than his forces could respond. But worse than the military defeats was the psychological impact. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians were experiencing fear. They had always been the hunters, the predators who struck from the darkness. Now they were the prey. My lord, his aide said nervously. The Emperor wants to see you. Vexthar closed his eyes. Emperor Zarthok was not known for his patience with failure. And this was failure on a scale that threatened the very existence of the Empire. The Emperor's throne room was a monument to Zephyrian power. The walls were decorated with trophies from conquered worlds, including artifacts from the 200 species they had exterminated. But today, those trophies felt more like accusations. Explain to me how a primitive species has destroyed half our empire in 3 months, Emperor Zarthok said. His voice was soft, but that only made it more terrifying. Vexthar had prepared for this moment. But now that it was here, he found himself struggling for words. My Emperor, the humans are not what they appeared to be. They have been planning this war for decades, maybe centuries. Planning? The Emperor asked. You mean while we were congratulating ourselves on our superiority, they were studying us like insects? Yes, my Emperor. Their diplomatic missions, their trade expeditions, even their scientific exchanges, all of it was intelligence gathering. They know our systems better than we do. Emperor Zarthok stood up from his throne and Vexthar could see the fear in his eyes. For the first time in his life, the master of a galactic empire was afraid. How do we stop them? The Emperor asked. Vexthar had been dreading this question because he didn't have a good answer. My Emperor, I'm not sure we can. They fight like no other species we've encountered. They adapt to our tactics faster than we can change them, and worst of all, they've turned our own slaves against us. The Emperor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with something Vexthar had never heard before. Desperation. What do they want? What are their terms for peace? Vexthar handed him a datapad containing humanity's latest message. The Emperor read it and his face went pale. They want unconditional surrender, the Emperor said. They want us to release all enslaved species, return all stolen property and submit to trial for war crimes. Yes, my Emperor. Emperor Zarthok threw the datapad across the room. Impossible. We are the Zephyrian Empire. We bow to no one. But even as he said these words, the Emperor knew they were hollow. The mighty empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years was crumbling under the assault of a species they had dismissed as primitive. Commander Paul Stewart led a strike force deep into Zephyrian space, targeting their military academies and training facilities. His mission was to capture young Zephyrian officers who might have information about their empire's defenses. What he found was more disturbing than he expected. The alien military schools weren't just teaching tactics and strategy. They were teaching hatred. Young Zephyrians were being trained to see other species as nothing more than resources to be used and discarded. Sir, we've captured their training materials, reported his intelligence officer. You're not going to like what we found. Paul read through the captured documents and felt his blood run cold. The Zephyrians weren't just taught that they were superior to other species. They were taught that other species weren't really alive, that killing them was no different from harvesting crops or mining ore. This isn't just a military empire, Paul said quietly. This is a culture built on murder. He sent his findings back to Admiral Morrison, along with a personal message. Sir, these people can never be allowed to continue existing as they are. What they've done goes beyond war crimes. This is evil in its purest form. Morrison received Paul's message while his fleet was approaching the Zephyrian home system. The final battle was about to begin, and now he understood exactly what humanity was fighting against. Not just an enemy empire, but a cancer that had been growing in the galaxy for 1,000 years. a disease that had consumed 200 species and would consume 200 more if it wasn't stopped. The time for mercy was over. The time for justice had come. The Zephyrian home system had never seen an enemy fleet. For 1,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire that brought death to other worlds, while remaining safe behind layers of defensive fleets. Today, that safety was about to end. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching as his massive fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Around him were not just human ships, but vessels crewed by every species the Zephyrians had enslaved. The Valdari, the Kethmori, the Sulani, and 9 other races had all joined humanity's crusade for justice. "Sir, enemy fleets are moving to intercept," reported Captain Lisa Hart. "They have over 5,000 ships defending their home world." Morrison nodded. It was the largest space battle in galactic history, and everything depended on its outcome. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison," he broadcast to his massive fleet. "Today we don't just fight for victory. We fight for every innocent life the Zephyrians have taken. We fight for justice. We fight for the future of our galaxy." The response came from 1,000 different ships in dozens of different languages, but the message was the same. They were ready to finish this war. General Amy Collins led the ground assault forces from her command ship. Her troops were a mix of human soldiers and liberated aliens, all united by their hatred of Zephyrian tyranny. They had been training for this moment for months, studying the layout of the enemy capital and planning their attack. "Remember, people," Amy said to her commanders, "we need High Admiral Vexthar and Emperor Zarthok alive. The galaxy needs to see justice done, not just revenge." The space battle began with the fury of a storm. Zephyrian ships, desperate to protect their homeworld, fought with a ferocity they had never shown before. But they were facing an enemy that had been planning this moment for decades. Captain Maria Santos commanded a squadron of fast attack ships, using hit-and-run tactics to break up the enemy formations. Her vessels darted between the massive Zephyrian battleships like sharks among whales, striking at weak points and vanishing before the aliens could respond. "All units, focus fire on their command ships," Maria ordered. "Take out their ability to coordinate and the rest will fall apart." Commander Tony Williams led the assault on the orbital defense platforms surrounding the Zephyrian homeworld. These massive stations had enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. But they had one weakness. They had been built using enslaved labor. "Attention all Zephyrian slaves," Tony broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Commander Williams of the Human Liberation Fleet. If you can hear this message, we are here to free you. Sabotage your stations and we'll get you out alive." The response was immediate. Across the orbital platforms, enslaved workers who had been waiting their entire lives for this moment began destroying the systems they had been forced to build. Explosions bloomed across the defensive ring as the platforms tore, themselves apart from within. Lieutenant Commander Nick Peterson commanded the Special Forces unit tasked with capturing the Zephyrian Central Command Center. His ships had used advanced stealth technology to slip past the enemy defenses and land troops directly in the capital city. "Sir, we're inside their command bunker," Nick reported. "Resistance is heavy, but we're advancing." Major Greg Foster worked frantically at a computer terminal in the captured facility. His mission was to hack the Zephyrian fleet control system and turn their own ships against them. "Almost got it," Greg muttered as his fingers flew across the alien controls. "Just need a few more minutes." Around him, human and alien soldiers fought desperately to hold the command center against Zephyrian counterattacks. The sound of weapons fire echoed through the corridors as both sides fought for control of the Empire's brain. High Admiral Vexthar watched his empire crumble from his personal command ship. Half his fleet was already destroyed, and the orbital defenses were falling one by one. But worst of all, he could see human troops fighting in the streets of his capital city. "My lord," his aide said desperately, "we should retreat to the outer systems and regroup." Vexthar looked at the young officer with something like pity. "There are no outer systems left. The humans have taken them all." It was true. While the final battle raged around the homeworld, human forces had been systematically capturing every remaining Zephyrian facility in the galaxy. There was nowhere left to run. Emperor Zarthok sat on his throne listening to the sounds of battle growing closer. His palace guards had fled hours ago, and only a handful of loyal officers remained. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years was ending, and he would be its last ruler. The throne room doors exploded inward, and human soldiers poured through the smoke. At their head walked a woman in a general's uniform, her face hard with determination. Emperor Zarthok, General Amy Collins said formally, "I arrest you in the name of the Galactic Liberation Coalition for crimes against sentient life." The Emperor laughed bitterly. "You think this is justice? You think destroying my empire will bring back the dead?" Amy looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering. "No, but it will make sure you never kill anyone else." The battle in space was reaching its climax. Admiral Morrison's fleet had broken through the Zephyrian defenses and was now surrounding the enemy homeworld. Thousands of alien ships hung dead in space, their crews either captured or fled. "Sir, Major Foster has successfully hacked their command system," Lisa Hart reported. "All remaining Zephyrian ships are under our control." Morrison watched as the last enemy vessels powered down their weapons and surrendered. It was over. After months of fighting, the Zephyrian Empire was finished. "Open a channel to all ships," Morrison ordered. "This is Admiral Morrison to all coalition forces. The war is over. The Zephyrian Empire has surrendered." The cheers that echoed across the communication channels came from a dozen different species, all celebrating their freedom. But Morrison felt no joy. Too many people had died for this moment to be a celebration. Commander Paul Stewart stood in the ruins of a Zephyrian prison camp, watching as the last of the enslaved workers were freed. The aliens had kept detailed records of their atrocities, and Paul had been reading them for hours. The scope of their crimes was almost impossible to comprehend. "Sir, we've found High Admiral Vexthar," one of his soldiers reported. "He's requesting to speak with you." Paul found the former Zephyrian leader sitting in a cell, his purple skin now pale with defeat. The alien who had once commanded fleets that terrorized the galaxy looked like a broken old man. "You want to gloat?" Vexthar asked bitterly. Paul shook his head. "I want to understand. How did your people become capable of such evil?" Vexthar was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Power. We had power over other species, and power corrupts. First we conquered them, then we enslaved them, then we began to see them as less than alive. And once that happened, killing them became as easy as stepping on insects." Paul nodded slowly. "That's why this can never happen again." 6 months later, Admiral Morrison stood before the Galactic Council, a new organization formed by all the free species in the galaxy. Behind him stood representatives from every world that had been liberated from Zephyrian rule. "The trials are complete," Morrison announced. "Emperor Zarthok and High Admiral Vexthar have been found guilty of genocide and crimes against sentient life. They will spend the rest of their lives in prison, along with their remaining followers." The council chamber erupted in applause from dozens of different species. Justice had finally been served. Dr. Alex Morgan approached Morrison after the ceremony. "Sir, what happens now? Humanity has become the most powerful force in the galaxy. How do we make sure we don't become what we just destroyed?" Morrison looked out at the stars through the council chamber's windows. It was a good question, and one that would define humanity's future. "We remember," Morrison said quietly. "We remember what the Zephyrians became when they forgot that power is meant to protect, not to conquer. We remember that with great strength comes great responsibility." He turned to face Alex. "And most importantly, we remember that we chose this war not because we wanted to rule, but because someone had to stop the killing." Captain Lisa Hart joined them at the window. "Sir, the liberated worlds are asking if humanity will help them rebuild their civilizations." Morrison nodded. "Of course. But as partners, not rulers. We'll help them become strong enough to defend themselves, and then we'll step back." It was a promise that humanity would keep for centuries to come. They had become the galaxy's protectors not through conquest, but through the choice to stand up to evil when no one else could. The Zephyrian Empire was gone, but its lesson remained, that power without conscience leads to destruction, and that sometimes good people must fight to stop those who choose darkness over light. Humanity had sent its final warning, and when that warning was ignored, they had done what they promised. They had shown the galaxy what happens when someone threatens the innocent and chooses war over peace. They had delivered justice, and the galaxy was free.